Fire is one of the greatest threats to workplace safety. And with the presence of flammable chemicals, the risk of fire and the damage that it can do only increases. For all the risks, flammables are among the most useful chemicals you can use. They are lubricants and cleaners. They're solvents, fuels, manufacturing components, and many other essential materials. If you're going to work with flammables, you need to know how to use them safely. That means knowing how to identify, store, and handle them properly. It also means knowing emergency procedures in case of a spill or accidental ignition. Flammables are solids, liquids, or gases that can catch fire and burn easily. Flammable liquids are classified by their flash point. Flash point is the lowest temperature at which a liquid gives off enough vapor to catch fire if an ignition source is present. Gasoline, for example, has a flash point of -50 degrees Fahrenheit, while kerosene's flash point is 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Liquids with lower flash points catch fire more easily, so they are more hazardous. Combustible liquids have higher flash points than flammables, so they are not as dangerous. They can still ignite if mishandled, however, so many of the rules used for flammables apply to combustibles as well. Another important factor to consider is material density. If it is less dense than water, it could float to the surface if water is used in fighting a fire and spread more quickly. The U.S. Department of Transportation, or DOT, has developed one of the commonly used systems for labeling flammables. The red DOT label identifies most flammables, while a blue label indicates that the material is a solid that can release flammable gases when mixed with water. Other materials can be dangerous in a fire even if they are not classified as flammable. An orange label identifies explosives. This yellow label identifies oxidizers and organic peroxides, which are not flammable but can make a fire burn faster and hotter. The National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, has developed another commonly used label. The diamond-shaped NFPA labels are divided into 4 sections, which describe different types of risks the material poses. The numbers in each section rank the degree of risk from 0, the lowest, to 4, the highest level. The blue section identifies the risk to human health. The yellow indicates instability. The red section shows the material's flammability. In this example, the 4 in the red diamond indicates that the material is extremely flammable. The white diamond indicates any special hazards that can make the material dangerous in a fire. For example, the letters in this label, OXY, show that this material is an oxidizer. In most cases, hazardous materials containers in the workplace must also have product warning labels on them. Your facility may also have its own labeling system. It's important for you to understand what each label means so you can handle the materials properly. To work with these materials safely, you must first understand them. The Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS, is your best source for information on each hazardous material you work with. The MSDS describes the material, tells how to handle it safely, and gives information on how to handle emergencies such as fires involving the material. Your workplace is required to have an MSDS for each hazardous material there. An important section of the MSDS for flammable materials is the section on fire and explosion hazards. This section lists the chemical flash point as well as the lower explosive limit, LEL, and upper explosive limit, UEL. The lower and upper explosive limits are the lowest and highest concentrations of vapors that will catch fire and burn. The MSDS also tells you which extinguishing agent to use on a fire involving the chemical, firefighting techniques, and any special fire hazards the chemical poses. Other important information in the MSDS includes health hazards, dangerous chemical reactions, spill and leak response, engineering controls, safe storage and use, personal protective equipment, or PPE. You can also find important information about the material from the Emergency Response Guidebook, or ERG. This book lists many hazardous materials and describes their fire and explosion hazards, firefighting techniques, appropriate PPE, and release response. Just as each chemical you work with has a different purpose, each requires different storage and handling procedures, depending on its characteristics. Whenever you work with a flammable material, check the MSDS to learn the right protective equipment, handling procedures, and safety practices for that material. Take time to study the MSDS before you begin working with the material. It'll be time well spent, especially if there's an emergency. While many flammable materials have their own properties and special precautions, there are some general guidelines that apply to most flammables. A fire needs 4 components before it can ignite: a chemical reaction, oxygen, fuel, and heat. Remove any of these components and the fire will not burn. The relationship of these 4 components is often represented by a figure called a tetrahedron. At the center of the tetrahedron is the chemical reaction. Certain elements can react with oxygen or oxidizers very rapidly. If they combine in the right proportions under the right conditions, the reaction will support a fire. One corner of the tetrahedron is fuel, the material that reacts with oxygen. The fuel can be solid, such as wood, paper, or cloth, liquid, such as oil or gasoline, or gas, such as acetylene or propane. Most liquids must convert to a vapor or gaseous state before they will burn. Another corner of the tetrahedron is oxygen. The air around us is about 21% oxygen, but fire needs only 16% oxygen in order to burn. Higher oxygen concentrations mean the chemical reaction will take place more rapidly and the fire will burn hotter. The third corner of the tetrahedron is heat, which raises the temperature of the fuel to the point where it vaporizes, as well as providing the energy to ignite the vapors. The easiest of the elements to remove is heat. To reduce the vapor concentration, keep flammable storage areas cool, and do not store containers in direct sunlight or under high-intensity work lights. Ventilation can also keep the temperature down and reduce vapor concentrations in enclosed areas where you use or store flammable materials. To keep ignition sources out, any area where flammables are stored or used must be clearly marked with warning signs. Typical ignition sources in work areas include flame-producing equipment, such as welding torches and portable heaters, or anything that might produce a spark, such as an electric power tool or faulty electrical equipment. Don't do hot work in areas that might have a dangerous concentration of flammable vapors. Even activities like striking a nail with a hammer can produce sparks that will ignite flammables in the air. And, of course, no smoking. It's a bad idea anywhere, but especially so around flammables. Oxygen is another part of the tetrahedron that can be controlled. It may not be possible to remove all the oxygen from flammable storage areas, but you can reduce the sources of oxygen by storing flammables far from oxidizers and organic peroxides. Also, to reduce hazards in the event of a fire, store flammables away from chemicals that react dangerously with water. These chemicals can ignite or release flammable vapors when water is used to fight the fire. Don't enter storage areas or handle flammable materials unless you're authorized to do so. When you do handle flammables, observe some simple rules to keep the risk to a minimum. Keep containers closed when you're not using them. Carry glass bottles with flammable materials in a rubber cradle designed for handling them. When transferring flammables from one container to another, be sure they are bonded to one another and grounded to prevent sparks from static electricity. Whenever possible, use a hand pump rather than pouring liquid between containers. Don't use flammables more often than necessary. Don't take more than you need. In some cases, it may be possible to substitute a non-flammable or combustible chemical for a flammable one. Solvents, for example, come in non-flammable forms, but may require a little extra work. Keep flammable materials under control by storing and using them only in approved areas. These areas are usually isolated from other work areas, and access to them is controlled. In some cases, flammables are stored outside of main buildings to prevent accidental ignition or minimize the effects of a fire in the storage area. In addition to having controlled access, flammable storage areas should have fire-resistant walls and doors. Always keep flammables in approved containers that are sturdy, leak-proof, and able to withstand heat. Protect containers by moving and storing them properly. Never drag packages. Dragging creates friction, which can generate enough heat to ignite the materials. Use load handling devices carefully and follow good handling practices. Store containers level and do not stack them too high or in unstable positions. If necessary, brace containers to keep them from falling. Store flammable gas cylinders in special racks designed to handle them. Make sure containers don't block walkways, hallways, exits, or emergency equipment. Check all containers periodically for leaks. Use only cabinets approved for flammable storage. Make sure cabinets are clearly marked and able to protect the contents from fire. Be sure that any electrical equipment in flammable storage and use areas is spark-proof and explosion-proof. Look for unsafe electrical conditions, such as loose connections, broken wires, and overloaded circuits. Report them immediately. Static electricity can also produce an ignition spark, most commonly when materials are being transferred from one container to another. To keep static electricity from building up, bond the containers by connecting them to each other with an electrical conductor before transferring any material. Also, be sure to electrically ground containers and transfer equipment. To prevent sparks from metal tools, use brass spark-proof hand tools around flammable materials. Good housekeeping is important to any safe operation, but especially when dealing with hazardous materials. Clean up any combustibles, such as paper and sawdust, and store oily rags in covered metal containers. Dispose of them properly and promptly. Regular, thorough housekeeping also helps prevent the explosion of flammable dust, which is produced by many flammable solids. Accidents involving flammable materials can have devastating results, so you need a good emergency plan. Emergency response usually calls for special training. Know your part in your facility's plan for taking care of leaks, spills, and fires. The most important rule is to do only what you've been trained to do. Don't become part of the problem. For spills or leaks, follow the MSDS. It will tell you what PPE to wear and how to recover and dispose of the material. Put on the correct PPE before you approach the spill and eliminate all ignition sources from the area. Use the right equipment and be sure you know what the right equipment is. Any electrical tools must be spark-proof and explosion-proof. During cleanup, dispose of recovered materials safely according to the MSDS and your facility's policy. Don't dump flammable liquid wastes into public sewers. Store all flammable wastes properly and dispose of them quickly. Fires involving flammable materials can spread quickly and burn hotter than other fires. Unless you've been properly trained, you may not be able to fight it, even if it seems small. Don't even think about fighting a fire unless you have a safe escape route. If the fire can cut off your exit, use it while you still can. Don't try to put out a large fire with a portable fire extinguisher, which is designed only for small fires. Your time is better spent going for help. Besides burning hotter and faster, flammables may also release toxic gases when they burn. In addition, explosions are possible under certain conditions. Check the MSDS or the ERG to find out which hazards the material presents and the right way to protect yourself. After you've considered the risks, you may decide that you can fight the fire yourself. Follow your emergency response training. It can save your life. Remember that different types of fires require different extinguishing agents. Water, in fact, can make some fires worse by spreading the fuel or igniting some materials. Fires involving flammable liquids, gases, or greases are known as Class B fires. Use only an extinguisher that is marked for Class B fires. You can make the difference in keeping your workplace safe from flammable materials. Know the materials you're using by reading the MSDS. Follow safe storage and handling procedures. Learn and practice your part in your facility's emergency response plan. Keep flammables under control, and you can help ensure a safe and healthy workplace.